Welcome to another episode of Books and Bytes.
Great to be back.
We've already explored the initial philosophical landscapes in our previous discussion, remember? Book 1, the early stuff.
The ancients and medieval thinkers.
Exactly. And now we're picking up the thread as we move from the medieval era right through the seismic shifts of the Renaissance and Enlightenment.
And onwards into the intellectual battlegrounds of the 19th century. It's quite a journey.
It really is. Our mission today is to distill the most crucial insights from this period, offering you a clear and hopefully engaging understanding of these pivotal ideas.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So following our look at the earlier periods, we now step into a world where the authority of the church, it starts to diminish, doesn't it?
Yeah, noticeably.
And that makes space for, a rising confidence in scientific inquiry, a more secular way of looking at things.
It wasn't like flipping a switch, though.
Oh, definitely not. A gradual shift. In the intellectual landscape, the social landscape too, power dynamics were changing.
The old feudal order was on its way out.
Pretty much. Giving way to monarchs and also the growing influence of rich merchant classes.
And the seeds of democracy were being planted then too, right?
Yeah.
Even if they wouldn't fully bloom until later with the American and French Revolution.
Exactly. Those ideas started bubbling up.
Okay, so thinking about this transition, let's talk about Erasmus for a second. He seems to really capture the feeling of this period.
He does, a complex figure. He saw the problems, the need for reform in the church, wasn't afraid to criticize abuses.
But he wasn't on board with Luther's approach.
No, he was deeply troubled by the radicalism, the violence of the Reformation movement under Luther. His whole debate with Luther about free will, it really shows someone grappling with these huge, monumental changes.
It's like you said, complex, almost caught between worlds.
That's a great way to put it. He saw the flaws in the old system, but couldn't fully embrace the revolutionary fire aiming to burn it all down.
That hesitation.
Yeah.
It really highlights something key about big shifts in thinking, doesn't it?
Absolutely. You often get these figures who are sort of straddling the old and the new. A tough spot to be in.
And then, boom, Copernicus, reimagining the entire cosmos.
Yeah, talk about a shakeup. This wasn't just tweaking astronomical charts. It was a fundamental challenge to a worldview held for centuries.
The focus shifts to observation, to making hypotheses you could actually test.
Right. Empirical observation becomes crucial. It was a whole new way of thinking about how we know things, how knowledge gets validated.
And the implications went way beyond just stars and planets.
Oh, far beyond. It signaled this move away from just accepting authority towards understanding based on observation and, importantly, reason.
Predictably, though, there was pushback.
Significant pushback. It's quite striking, actually. You have Luther and Calvin, who obviously had major disagreements with the Catholic Church.
But they agreed on Copernicus being wrong.
United in condemning him. Both cited scripture, Joshua commanding the sun to stand still, or Psalms about the earth being fixed to uphold the old geocentric view.
Wow, so resistance from both Catholic and Protestant clergy.
Exactly. It just shows how deeply embedded that old worldview was and what a massive challenge any new scientific idea faced back then.
That tension between dogma and science is fascinating. Okay, moving forward a bit, Francis Bacon. He's all about induction, right?
Very much so. He really championed the idea that we build general principles by carefully gathering lots of specific observations and analyzing them.
Kind of formalizing the scientific method.
In a way, yes, stressing systematic observation as the bedrock of knowledge. But there's a catch with his approach.
Which is?
His emphasis on induction by simple enumeration, basically drawing a universal rule from just seeing it happen a bunch of times.
I see the problem. How many times is enough?
Precisely. How many white swans do you need to see before you can say all swans are white? It's the classic problem of induction. Still debated today, really.
Interesting. And yet at the same time, that induction is gaining ground. Deduction, especially mathematical reasoning, is also becoming super important in science.
Absolutely. It wasn't just about looking. It was this powerful mix of observing the world and using logic, using math to make sense of it, build theories.
That really sets the stage for someone like Descartes.
Definitely. Descartes and his massive impact. I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum.
That famous line, it shifts everything inward, doesn't it?
Completely. Suddenly, the certainty of your own mind, your own thinking, becomes more fundamental, more reliable than anything you perceive outside yourself.
It really kicks off this whole era where subjective experience is central to philosophy.
That's the core of his revolution, grounding everything in the undeniable fact of his own consciousness, this move towards subjectivism.
The idea that our minds shape our experience.
Exactly. It had this huge, lasting influence. You can trace lines from Descartes to both continental idealism, think Kant, Hegel, and also British empiricism, like Locke and Hume.
It's also interesting that he held back publishing Le Monde, his work on physics.
Very telling, because it contained ideas like the Earth rotating, the universe being infinite, potentially heretical stuff at the time. Shows the pressure cooker intellectuals were still in.
Okay, so from Descartes, let's jump to Leibniz, another intellectual giant.
Oh, immensely powerful mind, though maybe a bit of a contrast between his public image and his deeper private ideas.
He's famous for the best of all possible worlds idea, right? The optimistic view.
That's his best-known stance, yes. But his unpublished work, his deeper philosophical system, goes into much more complex, sometimes less rosy territory.
And logic was key for him.
Hugely important. He saw logic as the fundamental key to unlocking the nature of reality itself. It connects him back to thinkers like Parmenides and Plato, who also tried to get at ultimate truths through pure reason.
But there's a critique there, isn't there? About inferring things about the world just from the structure of language.
Yes, that's a significant criticism. The idea that you can read the nature of reality directly off, say, subject-predicate grammar.
Like, because sentences have subjects and predicates, reality must be made of substances with properties.
Kind of. The worry is that relying too heavily on that structure might impose a kind of unity or simplicity on reality that isn't actually there. How does simple subject-predicate logic easily account for relationships between things, or for the existence of many independent things, like his monads?
Right, language might not be a perfect mirror. Okay, let's switch gears to Locke. Hugely influential, maybe the cornerstone of modern liberalism.
You could definitely argue that. Maybe not the most abstract thinker, but incredibly influential. His ideas really captured the mood in England, and then, wow, they just exploded when they reached France. Became revolutionary fuel.
The state of nature, natural law, those inherent rights, life, liberty, property.
Foundational concepts. They provided this powerful argument against absolute monarchy, a justification for individual freedoms. Massively important.
He put a lot of emphasis on property, didn't he? As the main reason for even having government.
He did. Protecting property was central to his justification for civil society, which leads to an interesting tension in his thought.
How so?
Well, he seems to have a kind of utilitarian ethic in places, judging actions by their outcomes, the greatest good. But he also strongly believes in these inherent natural rights.
How do those fit together? Can a right be inherent if it can be overridden for the greater good?
That's the puzzle. It's a classic problem in political philosophy, balancing individual rights against the collective welfare. Still wrestle with that one.
And his idea of checks and balances, it didn't quite pan out in England the way he maybe envisioned.
Right. He advocated for separating powers, but the system that actually evolved in England, especially later, saw power become much more concentrated in the executive, the prime minister, and cabinet, sort of contrary to his initial principles.
Okay, now for something completely different. Berkeley. Idealism. Only minds and ideas exist. That sounds counterintuitive.
It definitely does. His core argument was essentially that all we ever directly experience are our own sensations and ideas. We never actually perceive a physical object independent of our mind.
So to be is to be perceived.
That's the famous summary. For Berkeley, the existence of, say, a tree depends on it being perceived by some mind, either ours or ultimately God's. Matter as a separate substance. He argued it was an unnecessary, even incoherent idea.
But what about, the world seeming to exist when nobody's looking? Or things like a time before life existed? Or math problems nobody's solved yet?
Those are exactly the kinds of challenges his idealism faces. It's logically coherent, perhaps, but it strains against common sense and raises difficult questions about consistency and the past.
Then we get Hume taking empiricism, the idea that knowledge comes from experience, and pushing it to its absolute limit.
Right to the edge. Hume was rigorous. If all knowledge comes from sense experience, what can we really know for certain? His answer was not much beyond our immediate perceptions.
Especially his take on cause and effect. That's a big one.
Huge. He argued we never actually perceive a necessary connection between a cause and its effect. We just see one thing constantly followed by another, constant conjunction, he called it.
So our belief that, say, the cue ball hitting the 8 ball causes it to move is just Habit.
A psychological habit, yes. Formed by repeated experience. We develop an expectation, but we never actually see the causal force itself. He was deeply skeptical.
He even questioned if we can be sure objects continue to exist when we aren't looking at them.
Exactly. If all knowledge is perception, what grounds our belief in things existing unperceived? For Hume, it was another belief based on habit, not logical certainty. In many ways, he's seen as a kind of dead end for that pure form of empiricism. Logically consistent, maybe, but hard to actually live by.
Okay, let's shift again. Rousseau, a really pivotal figure, kind of bridging the Enlightenment and the Romantic movement that followed.
He really is. He valued reason, like the Enlightenment thinkers, but put a huge emphasis on feeling, intuition, and nature. A definite countercurrent.
The inherent goodness of people in a state of nature.
Right. Civilization, society, he argued, corrupted us. His ideas were massively influential in education. Think of his book Emile, and of course in political thought with the social contract.
Social contract. That's about reconciling individual freedom with living in a society, isn't it?
That's the core problem he's tackling. How can we be both free individuals and members of an ordered state? His answer involved the concept of the general will.
The general will. Sounds good, like the collective good, but it has a potential dark side.
It does. While Rousseau meant it to be the expression of the common interest, figuring out what it is and enforcing it, well, there's a real danger it could become tyrannical. The majority imposing its will, potentially crushing minority rights or individual dissent, all in the name of this general will. And Rousseau's own life was pretty tumultuous, often clashing with authorities. It underscores how tricky these ideals are in practice. The whole Romantic movement that he helped inspire leaned heavily into emotion, aesthetics, valuing wild nature, ruins, that sort of thing, over cold reason or utility. It even fed into rising nationalism.
Next up, Kant. Attempting this grand synthesis, trying to bring rationalism and empiricism together.
A monumental task. Kant's critical philosophy aimed to do just that. His big idea, often called his Copernican revolution in philosophy.
The mind shapes our experience, not just passively receiving it.
Precisely. Instead of our minds conforming to objects, Kant argued that objects must conform to our minds. Our minds have inherent structures, categories like causality, and forms of intuition like space and time that actively organize the raw data of our senses.
So the world we experience, the phenomenal world,
is a product of both the sensory input and our mind's structuring activity. What the world is like in itself, independent of our minds. The noumenal world that Kant said we can never truly know.
And his arguments about space, for instance, that it's an intuition we bring to experience, not something we learn from it.
Right. He argued space isn't a concept derived from observing things, but a fundamental way our sensibility is structured, a necessary framework for any outer experience. Hugely influential arguments, though still debated, of course.
Okay, so we're heading into the 19th century now. Things seem to get even more complex.
Definitely. The pace picks up. You've got the world expanding conceptually, geographically. You have massive scientific shifts like Darwin's theory of evolution shaking everything up.
And huge social changes, industrialization, the rise of new economic forces that Marx analyzed.
Plus widespread revolts against traditional systems, both political and philosophical. It's a real ferment of ideas.
The text mentions two main kinds of revolt against tradition.
Yeah, broadly speaking, there's the sort of romantic, individualistic revolt. Think figures like Byron or philosophers like Schopenhauer and later Nietzsche, often emphasizing will, feeling, aesthetics, sometimes quite pessimistically.
And the other kind.
More rationalistic, systematic revolt. Thinkers inspired by the French Revolution, the utilitarians in Britain, and, of course, Marx and the socialists, aiming for radical social and political restructuring based on rational or historical analysis.
Let's touch on Hegel first. His system seems incredibly ambitious. Reason as the ultimate reality.
Hugely ambitious. For Hegel, reality is fundamentally rational. He called it reason or spirit or the absolute. And it's not static. It unfolds through history in a dynamic process.
The dialectic. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
That's the famous mechanism. An idea or situation, thesis, contains contradictions that lead to its opposite, antithesis, and the conflict resolves into a higher, more complex stage synthesis, which then becomes a new thesis. History, for Hegel, is this ongoing dialectical unfolding of reason.
Culminating in the absolute idea.
Yes, the point where spirit fully understands itself. Thought. Thinking about thought. It's a complex, all-encompassing idealism where spirit is the only true reality.
Okay, then Schopenhauer offers a sharp contrast, doesn't he? Also influenced by Kant, but much more pessimistic.
Very much so. He took Kant's unknowable thing in itself and said, I know what it is. It's will.
Not rational will, though.
No, a blind, irrational, constantly striving force. This will is the fundamental reality behind everything, driving all our desires, our actions, and because it's fundamentally insatiable, always wanting, it's the ultimate source of all suffering in the world.
A pretty bleak outlook. Any escape?
Temporary escapes, maybe?
Right.
Through aesthetic contemplation, losing yourself in art, or through aesthetic denial of the will. But fundamentally, for Schopenhauer, life is a pendulum swinging between pain and boredom.
Then comes Nietzsche, who takes things in another radical direction, rejects traditional morality, religion. God is dead.
A provocative declaration, certainly. Nietzsche saw the decline of religious belief as leaving a void, undermining traditional values. He called for a revaluation of all values.
Based on the will to power.
Yes. He saw this will to power not just as a desire to dominate others, but as a fundamental life drive towards growth, strength, self-mastery, overcoming limitations, creating your own values.
And the Übermensch, or overman.
That's his ideal. A figure who transcends conventional morality, embraces the will to power, affirms life in all its difficulty, and creates meaning for themselves. He admired strong individuals, critiqued what he saw as the mediocrity of the masses, powerful, controversial stuff.
Now Marx. He takes a Hegelian framework, a dialectic, but applies it very differently.
Completely differently. Marx grounds his philosophy in material conditions, specifically economics. His historical materialism argues that the economic base, the means of production and the relationships around it, determines the social and political superstructure, including ideas and culture.
So history isn't driven by spirit, but by economics.
And class struggle. He saw history as a series of conflicts between dominant and subordinate economic classes, feudal lords versus serfs, and in his time, the bourgeoisie, owners of capital, versus the proletariat, workers.
And he predicted this struggle would lead inevitably to
the overthrow of capitalism by the proletariat and the establishment of a communist, classless society, a socialist revolution driven by the internal contradictions of capitalism itself.
Okay, briefly touching on a few later figures. Bergson. Back to intuition.
Yes, Bergson reacted against what he saw as excessive intellectualism, the tendency of reason to freeze and analyze reality, missing its fluid nature. He emphasized intuition as a more direct way of grasping reality.
And his idea of time, true duration.
Right. He distinguished between clock time, mathematical time, which is spatialized and measurable, and duration, which is lived time, qualitative, flowing, indivisible. Our inner experience. This was key to his arguments for free will, suggesting our actions arise from this deeper dynamic self.
Then William James and pragmatism, a very American philosophy.
Often seen that way. Pragmatism, especially James's version, radically redefines truth. It's not about accurately mirroring some static reality.
It's about what works, practical consequences.
Exactly. The truth of an idea lies in its practical payoff, its usefulness in guiding our actions and making sense of our experience. He also proposed the will to believe, that in certain situations where evidence is lacking but belief has positive consequences, we're justified in choosing to believe.
That definition of truth based on good effects must have been controversial.
Highly. Critics ask, can something be true just because believing it makes you feel good, even if it's factually wrong? It raises deep questions about the nature of truth and belief.
And finally, Dewey. Building on pragmatism.
John Dewey developed instrumentalism. He moved even further from traditional ideas of fixed facts or timeless truths. For Dewey, ideas are tools or instruments for solving problems.
So instead of truth, he talked about warranted assertability.
Right. A claim is warranted, not because it matches some past reality, but because it's proven effective through inquiry and has positive future consequences. It helps us navigate the world successfully. It's a very forward-looking, action-oriented philosophy.
Wow. We've certainly covered a vast landscape today, from the Renaissance rediscovery of classical thought, through the Enlightenment's focus on reason, the Romantic reaction, and into the intense debates and scientific shifts of the 19th century.
It's an incredible sweep of intellectual history. So many attempts to grapple with the biggest questions. What can we know? What is real? How should we live? How should society be organized?
And you, listening, have hopefully gained some valuable insights into these incredibly influential thinkers and the evolution of their ideas. We really trust this deep dive has helped clarify some of these complex concepts without being overwhelming.
There's so much more depth to explore, of course.
Absolutely. To really dig into these thinkers and their monumental contributions in greater detail, we highly recommend grabbing a copy of History of Western Philosophy. You'll find a link right there in the description.
It's a classic resource for anyone interested in this journey.
And if you enjoyed this intellectual adventure with us today and want to keep unpacking the world of ideas, please do subscribe to Books and Bytes.
We'd love to have you along for future explorations.
Until next time, keep thinking.